The room was a cathedral of silence. Julian Marchetti sat behind a desk carved from the heart of a century-old oak. The wood was dark, almost black, polished to a mirror sheen that reflected the low, golden light of the desk lamp. It was the only light in the vast study. Beyond its warm circle, shadows clung to shelves of leather-bound books that had never been read, to the deep armchairs where deals that shaped the city's underworld were made, and to the thick, Persian rug that had absorbed more secrets than any priest. He was not reading. His hands, large and scarred, rested on either side of a closed ledger. The numbers inside were already memorized, the profits and losses balanced in the cold arithmetic of his mind. He was simply listening to the quiet. It was his oldest friend, his most loyal soldier. Quiet was control. Quiet was power. In the 30 years he had run this city, he had learned that the loudest man in the room was always the weakest. Julian was never loud. A soft knock, precise and respectful, broke the stillness. One knock. Marco. Enter. His voice was gravel, unused for hours. The door opened, and Marco stepped inside, closing it gently behind him. He was a man shaped by loyalty, his frame thick, his face a mask of placid deference that hid a mind as sharp as any blade Julian wielded. He stood by the door, waiting. The agency sent the replacement, Marco said, his tone even. For the evening shift. The regular girl, her mother is ill. Julian gave a slight nod, his eyes not leaving the polished surface of the desk. It was a detail so minor it barely registered. Staff came and went. They were ghosts, meant to be unseen, unheard. They cleaned the spaces he occupied and then vanished. She's been vetted? Julian asked. The question was rote. Triple-checked. An agency girl. Clean record. Desperate for the work, from the look of her. Another nod. Send her in. Tell her the rules. Don't touch anything on the desk. Don't speak unless spoken to. Be gone before sunrise. Of course, Boss Marco paused, a flicker of hesitation. There is one thing. Julian's gaze finally lifted, his dark eyes fixing on his lieutenant. Marco did not waste words. She is very young. Julian's expression did not change. Are her arms strong enough to push a vacuum? Yes, boss. Then her age is irrelevant. Marco nodded and opened the door. In here. A young woman stepped into the room. She was small, slender, swallowed by the cavernous space. Her clothes were neat but worn, the fabric thin, the colors faded from too many washings. She clutched the handle of a cleaning caddy, her knuckles white. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor, on the intricate patterns of the expensive rug. She looked terrified. Julian felt a familiar flicker of disinterest. She was just another face in the endless, anonymous procession of people who served his world but were never part of it. He was about to look away, to dismiss her and return to his silence. But then she made a mistake. Perhaps she felt his gaze on her. Perhaps it was instinct. She lifted her head. And her eyes met his. The world stopped. The silence in the room was no longer his friend. It was a thief. It stole the air from his lungs. The desk, the books, the shadows, they all dissolved. There was only the girl. And her eyes. A shade of green so particular he had seen it only once before in his entire life. The green of new spring leaves after a long winter, shot through with flecks of impossible gold, like sunlight trapped in amber. Elena's eyes. His sister. 30 years. 30 years of silence, of distance, of a wound he thought had long since scarred over into something numb and painless. But it wasn't a scar. It was a live wire, and this girl, this stranger, had just pressed her fingers against it. He did not move. He could not. He was a statue carved from memory. Marco, standing by the door, saw it. The shift. A change so profound in its stillness it was more alarming than any outburst. The boss, a man who moved with the deliberate economy of a predator, was frozen. His face, usually an unreadable mask of command, was suddenly, terrifyingly blank. The girl flinched under his stare, her gaze dropping back to the floor. She thought she had done something wrong. Julian's voice, when it came, was a rasp, a sound dredged up from a place he had buried long ago. "What is your name?" The question was a breach. A shattering of every rule he lived by. He did not know their names. He did not want to know. Names created people. People created attachments. Attachments were weaknesses. The girl's head jerked up again, startled. She swallowed hard. "Sophia, sir. Sophia." The name meant nothing. But the eyes. The eyes were everything. He continued to stare, his mind a maelstrom of past and present. He saw a little girl with scraped knees and a brilliant smile, her green-gold eyes looking up at him with absolute trust. He saw a teenager, her eyes full of fire and rebellion. He saw a young woman, her eyes filled with tears and betrayal on a rain-slicked train platform, the last time he ever saw her. Marco took a half-step forward, his hand twitching. "Boss?" Julian raised a hand, a gesture so small it was barely perceptible. But it stopped Marco cold. It was an order. Stay put. Do not interfere. He had not seen those eyes in 30 years. Not since the day he broke his own heart to save his sister's life. Stay with me until the end, because what happens next will prove that some bonds can never truly be broken. Like this video, hit subscribe, and let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. Now, let's get back to the story. Julian Marchetti was not born into silence, he had built it around himself, brick by painful brick. His father, Niccolo Marchetti, had been a man of noise and laughter, of grand gestures and sloppy sentiment. He ran his family like a chaotic feast, full of backslapping loyalty one moment and bloody betrayal the next. Julian, his quiet, watchful son, had seen the weakness in it all. Emotion was a liability. When Niccolo died, not from a rival's bullet but from a weak heart that had loved too much wine and food, Julian took his place. He was 25. The change was immediate and brutal. He purged the noise. He trimmed the fat. He replaced the loud, unpredictable capos with cold, efficient soldiers like Marco. He transformed his father's messy fraternity into a silent, disciplined army. His empire was built on 3 simple rules. Pay your dues on time. Never bring heat to the family. And the most important rule, the one carved into his very soul, civilians were sacrosanct. You did not touch them. You did not involve them. You did not harm them. Wives, children, innocent bystanders, they were off limits. To break this rule was to invite a response from Julian that was swift, personal, and permanent. It was a code of honor in a dishonorable world, and it was what made him different. It was what made him feared. This code was forged in the fire of his love for his sister, Elena. She was 5 years younger, all light where he was shadow. While he was learning the brutal calculus of his father's business, she was learning to play the piano, her laughter echoing through the large, lonely house. She was the one good, pure thing in his life. He was her guardian, her confidant, her hero. He protected her from everything. Until he couldn't. He was 28, his power just beginning to solidify. A rival family, the Falcones, saw Elena as a pawn. They didn't try to harm her directly. They were smarter than that. They had one of their young, handsome soldiers get close to her. She fell in love, blind to the danger. Julian saw the trap immediately. He saw the path it would lead down, Elena used as leverage, a knife to his throat, forcing him to cede territory, to show weakness. He had to choose. His empire or his sister. He chose her. He did not kill the boy. That would have started a war, and Elena would have been caught in the crossfire. Instead, he destroyed her love for him. He confronted her. He told her the boy was a spy. When she refused to believe him, her heart full of naive love, he did the cruelest thing he had ever done. He manufactured evidence. He made it look like the boy was not only a spy but was also unfaithful, laughing about her with his friends. He made her listen to a doctored recording. He watched her heart break. He watched the light in her incredible eyes dim. And then he sent her away. He gave her a new name, a new life, a bank account with more money than she could ever spend. He put her on a train to a small, quiet town hundreds of miles away. "Why are you doing this?" she had wept on the platform, the rain mixing with her tears. "To protect you," he had said, his own heart a cold, dead stone in his chest. "Protect me from what?" "From being happy." "From me," he whispered, a truth she couldn't possibly understand. He promised to stay in touch, but he knew he couldn't. Any contact was a thread the Falcons or others could pull. To keep her safe, she had to be completely, utterly disconnected from him. For the first 20 years, he sent money through a labyrinth of shell corporations and anonymous accounts, a silent guardian angel she never knew she had. He had Marco's predecessor get yearly reports. She had married a quiet man, a librarian. They had a child. A daughter. Then, 10 years ago, the trail went cold. She and her husband moved without a trace. The report stopped. He assumed she had finally cut the last thread, that she wanted a life completely free of the shadow of her past. The thought was a constant, dull ache. He had saved her life but lost his sister. Now, a girl named Sophia with his sister's eyes was standing in his study, her hands trembling. Sophia's world was a universe. From 6 in the morning until 2, she worked at a diner, her hands raw from hot water and cleaning chemicals. From 3 until 5, she stocked shelves at a corner grocery for cash under the table. And now, this new job, cleaning a mansion so large it felt like a different planet, from 8 at night until the early hours of the morning. Every dollar was accounted for. Every cent had a destination before it even touched her hand. Rent. Utilities. Food. And the most important, the most expensive, the medicine. Her mother, Elena, lay in a small bed in the corner of their tiny. Elena was a ghost of a woman, her body frail, her mind a flickering candle in the wind. Some days, she was lucid, her green-gold eyes, a little faded now but still beautiful, full of love for her daughter. On those days, she would talk about the past, about a life before this one. She would talk about her brother. "He was so strong, Sophia," she would whisper, her voice thin as paper. "He always protected me. I wonder where he is." Sophia would just smile and hold her mother's hand, the stories a familiar, sad fairy tale. She had never known this mysterious uncle. Lately, the bad days were outnumbering the good. The doctor said it was a degenerative condition, exacerbated by stress and poor nutrition over the years. Better care, better medicine could help. But better was a luxury Sophia couldn't afford. Their landlord, Mr. Petrov, made sure of that. He was a man whose smile never reached his cold, piggy eyes. He owned half the tenements on their block, squeezing every last cent from people who had nowhere else to go. The rent was late again. He had been by that afternoon, his presence filling their small apartment with a foul, predatory energy. "Sophia, Sophia," he had said, letting his gaze linger on. She had stood between him and her mother's bed, a small, fierce guardian. "I'll have the money by the end of the week." He had chuckled, a wet, unpleasant sound. "The end of the week is not now. But maybe we can come to an arrangement. A pretty girl like you, you don't have to work so hard." The implication hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Sophia felt a wave of nausea. "I'll have the money," she repeated, her voice shaking with barely suppressed rage. He had left, but his threat remained. He was a vulture, circling. And so, Sophia found herself that night standing. She had mumbled her name and then spent the next 3 hours cleaning the enormous, silent house, her every move shadowed by the weight of that man's gaze. She could feel it on her back, even when he was rooms away. It wasn't a lecherous gaze, like Petrov's. It was something else. Something she couldn't name. It was like being watched by a storm cloud, full of lightning and unspoken history. When her shift was over, she was paid in cash by the quiet, imposing man named Marco. The amount was double what the agency had quoted. A bonus, Marco said, his face unreadable. The boss was pleased with your work. Back in his study, Julian stood before the window, watching the city begin to wake. The sky was a pale, bruised purple. He hadn't slept. He hadn't moved. He had simply waited for the sun to rise, his mind replaying a single moment, over and over. The girl's eyes. Elena's eyes. Coincidence? It was possible. A genetic fluke. A 1 in a billion chance. His world did not deal in coincidence. It dealt in angles, in leverage, in threats. Could this be a play? A trap laid by some long-forgotten enemy? The Falcones were history, their family dismantled by Julian years ago. There were always new rivals, but this felt too personal, too specific. No one knew about Elena. He had erased her from his life so completely that she was a myth, a ghost story whispered only by the oldest members of his organization. He turned from the window and walked to a locked drawer in his desk. He opened it with a small, silver key he wore on a chain around his neck. Inside, there was only one item. A faded black and white photograph. It was him at 18, gangly and trying to look tough in a borrowed suit. Beside him was a 13-year-old Elena, her hair in pigtails, a gaped grin on her face. Her eyes, even in monochrome, blazed with a fierce, joyful light. He picked up the photo, his thumb brushing over her smiling face. He had made a promise to his mother on her deathbed, her own hand frail in his. Always protect her, Julian. She is too good for this world. Always protect Elena. He had tried. He had broken her heart and his own to do it. He had exiled her, cut her out of his life like a surgeon removing a cancer, all to keep her safe. And for what? For her to end up in a tenement, sick and fading, her daughter scrubbing floors to pay for medicine. A cold, slow-burning rage began to build in his chest. It was not the hot, explosive anger of his youth. This was a glacial fury, immense and unstoppable. It was directed at the world, at fate, at himself. He had failed. His wealth, his power, all the fear he commanded, it was all meaningless if he couldn't protect the one person he had sworn to. Even if this girl was just a stranger, the resemblance was a sign. A chance. A chance to honor his promise, to right a 30-year-old wrong. The thought of some petty slumlord putting his filthy hands on a girl who looked at him with his sister's eyes, it was an offense against his entire being. It violated the deepest tenet of his code. He placed the photograph carefully back in the drawer and locked it. The internal debate was over. His code had always been about protecting the innocent from the predators. This girl, Sophia, and her mother, they were the innocent. And he knew who the predator was. He pressed a button on the intercom on his desk. Marco. His lieutenant's voice came back instantly. Yes, boss. I have a job for you. The girl. Sophia. I want to know everything. Where she lives. Who her mother is. What her troubles are. I want to know who she pays her rent to. I want to know it all. And I want to know it an hour ago. There was a brief pause. It's already done, boss. Julian frowned. Explain. When you looked at her. I knew. I made a call. My cousin's kid works at the agency. I got her file. Address, family details. The mother's name is Elena. She's sick. The building is owned by a bottom feeder named Petrov. He's been squeezing the tenants for months. Word is he's got a special interest in the girl. Julian felt a sliver of pride in his lieutenant's foresight. Marco didn't just follow orders, he anticipated them. Good, Julian said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous tenor. Get the car. We're going to pay Mr. Petrov a visit. This time, Marco's pause was longer. He knew the protocol. The boss did not handle such things. He did not leave the fortress for a street-level maggot like Petrov. He dispatched soldiers. He made phone calls. He did not get his hands dirty with such trivialities. Boss? Marco's voice was laced with confusion. Are you sure? I can handle this. Me and a few of the boys. It will be clean. No, Julian said, his voice leaving no room for argument. This one is personal. He walked out of the study and into the hall, shrugging on a long, black cashmere coat that Marco held for him. He was no longer just the boss. He was no longer just a man of business. He was a brother. An uncle. A protector. And he was about to remind the world what happened when someone threatened his family. The drive was silent. Julian stared out the tinted window of the armored sedan, the city streets a blur of concrete and hurried lives. He didn't see them. He saw a train platform in the rain. He saw a pair of terrified green-gold eyes. Marco drove, his eyes on the road, occasionally glancing at his boss in the rearview mirror. He had never seen him like this. This wasn't business. This wasn't strategy. This was something else, something primal. Petrov's office was in the back of a grimy check-cashing establishment in a part of town the police only visited in pairs. The air smelled of desperation and cheap cigars. Two of Julian's men, silent and imposing in dark suits, had entered first, clearing the path. They now stood like statues on either side of the office door. Julian and Marco walked in. The office was small, cluttered with stacks of paper, overflowing ashtrays, and half-empty bottles of whiskey. Mr. Petrov sat behind a cheap metal desk, a large, slovenly man in a stained shirt. He looked up, his eyes widening in surprise, then narrowing with a mix of fear and arrogance when he saw Julian. He recognized him, of course. Everyone in the city's underbelly knew the face of Julian Marchetti. Marchetti, Petrov grunted, trying to project an authority he did not possess. He gestured to the two flimsy chairs in front of his desk. To what do I owe the honor? You need a loan. He laughed, a phlegmy, unpleasant sound. Julian did not smile. He didn't sit. He simply stood before the desk, his presence sucking all the air and bravado out of the room. Marco stood behind him, his hand inside his coat. We need to talk about one of your tenants, Julian said, his voice quiet, almost conversational. Petrov leaned back, feigning relaxation. My tenants? I have many. You'll have to be more specific. If one of your people is behind on payments. Her name is Sophia, Julian said, cutting him off. Petrov's greasy smile returned. Ah, Sophia. The pretty one. A hard worker. A shame about her mother. Very sad, his eyes glinted with avarice. Is she a friend of yours? If you want to cover her rent, I'm happy to accept payment. I'm not here to talk about rent, Julian said. He reached into his coat and pulled out the old, faded photograph of him and Elena. He didn't look at it. He slid it across the desk. It came to a stop next to an overflowing ashtray. Petrov glanced down at it, confused. What's this? Your family album. That little girl, Julian said, his voice as cold as a tombstone. Her name is Elena. She's my sister. Petrov looked from the photo back to Julian, a flicker of understanding and real fear dawning in his eyes. He still didn't get it. Not all of it. Okay, Petrov said slowly. Nice picture. What does this have to do with me? Julian leaned forward slightly, his hands resting on the back of one of the chairs. The movement was slow, deliberate, full of menace. The girl you've been tormenting, Sophia, Julian said, his voice dropping to a whisper. The one whose apartment you enter without permission. The one you make suggestions to. She has her mother's eyes. He paused, letting the words hang in the stale air. And her mother is my sister. The color drained from Petrov's face. The fake bravado, the greasy smile, the arrogance, it all evaporated in an instant, replaced by a stark, primal terror. He looked from Julian's dead calm face to the photograph, then back again. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He was a fish, gasping for air on the deck of a ship. She never said, he stammered, his hands beginning to tremble. She doesn't know, Julian said. For 30 years, she hasn't known. I did that to protect her. To keep her safe from her brother's world. To keep her safe from men like you. Men with no honor. Men who prey on women and the sick. Julian straightened up. He looked at Marco. Marco, explain to Mr. Petrov the new arrangement. Marco stepped forward. His voice was flat, devoid of any emotion, like a lawyer reading a will. As of 1 hour ago, the deed for the building at 714 North Ash Street was transferred from Mr. Petrov's holding company to a blind trust. The beneficiary of that trust is Sophia Rossi. She is now your landlord. All back rent for all tenants is forgiven, effective immediately. Any and all outstanding debts owed to you by the tenants are now considered paid in full. Petrov stared, his mind unable to process the speed at which his world was being dismantled. You can't, the deed, it's legal. We have the most expensive lawyers in the city, Marco said calmly. They are very creative. They found a number of irregularities in your filings. Tax evasion. Fraud. Enough to put you away for a very long time. Or, you can sign the papers, which are on their way here now, and walk away. Walk away. Petrov squeaked. Walk away with nothing. Julian finally spoke again. You will walk away with your life, Mr. Petrov. Which, I assure you, is far more than you deserve. You will sign the papers. You will give my man your keys. And then you will disappear. If I ever hear your name again, if I ever see your face again, if you are ever spotted within the borders of this state again, I will not send my lawyer. The threat was unspoken, but it was absolute. It filled every corner of the small, dirty office. Petrov began to sweat, fat beads rolling down his temples. He looked at Julian's eyes that held no heat, no anger, just a chilling, final certainty. He nodded frantically. Yes. Okay. I understand. I'll sign. I'll go. Julian turned and walked to the door without another word. His part was done. The filth had been handled. The message delivered. As he stepped out into the grey afternoon, he left Marco to finalize the transaction. Justice, in his world, was not about courts and judges. It was about balancing the scales. And Mr. Petrov's account had just been permanently closed. He would not be bothering anyone, ever again. Julian did not go to the apartment on North Ash Street. Not yet. The thought of seeing Elena, of facing the reality of what her life had become, was a weight he was not ready to bear. First, he had to fix it. He spent the next 2 days as a whirlwind of silent, decisive action. He didn't just want to solve their problems, he wanted to erase them. He dispatched Marco to orchestrate a move. He owned a dozen residential properties across the city, quiet, high-end buildings used for housing associates or as safe houses. He chose a bright, spacious apartment in a secure, discreet building overlooking a park. It had 2 bedrooms, a modern kitchen, and a small balcony where the sun lingered in the afternoon. He had it furnished not with the cold, masculine aesthetic of his own home, but with soft colors, comfortable furniture, things he vaguely remembered Elena liking. Flowers. He told Marco to fill the place with flowers. He called the chief administrator of the best private hospital in the city, a man who owed him more than one favor. He arranged for a full medical team, the top neurologist in the state, to be on standby. All expenses were to be billed to a corporate account that could not be traced back to him. Only when everything was in place, when the new apartment was ready and the medical team was waiting, did he allow himself to act. Marco went to the old apartment. Sophia was there, packing the few belongings they owned into cardboard boxes. She was confused. The day before, a lawyer had shown up with a deed, telling her she now owned the building. She thought it was a mistake, a cruel joke. Then, the lawyer had handed her an envelope full of cash. For immediate expenses, he had said, and left. Now, this imposing man who worked for the terrifying man with the sad eyes was telling her she had to move. Where? She asked, her voice small. Who are you people? We're friends, Marco said, his tone softened, a skill he rarely used. We're taking you and your mother to a better place. A safe place. An ambulance, private and unmarked, was waiting downstairs. Gentle, professional paramedics moved Elena, who was having one of her bad days, her eyes clouded with confusion. They transferred her onto a soft gurney, treating her with a kindness and respect that made Sophia's eyes well up with tears. Sophia followed them in a black car driven by another silent man. She watched her old, crumbling tenement disappear in the distance. She was terrified, but for the first time in years, she also felt a sliver of hope. It was a dangerous feeling. The new apartment was breathtaking. It was flooded with light. It smelled of fresh paint and roses. Sophia walked through it in a daze, touching the smooth countertops, the soft fabric of the sofa. In one of the bedrooms, her mother was already being settled into a state-of-the-art hospital bed, a kind-faced nurse checking her vitals. Sophia found Marco standing by the large window in the living room. Why? She whispered, tears finally tracing paths down her cheeks. Why are you doing this? My boss wanted to help, Marco said simply. But we can't pay for this. Any of this. It's already paid for. Just then, the door opened. Julian Marchetti stepped inside. He had taken off his heavy coat. He wore a simple, dark sweater. He looked less like a crime lord and more like a man burdened by a great weight. He walked over to Sophia, stopping a few feet away. She looked at him, her fear warring with a desperate gratitude. I don't understand, she said. Thank you. But I have to know why. She straightened her back, a spark of her mother's fire in her eyes. We don't accept charity. Julian's expression softened. A faint, sad smile touched his lips. It isn't charity. He looked past her, toward the bedroom where her mother lay. A long time ago, I lost something. Something more valuable than money. I thought it was gone forever. He met her gaze, and in the depths of his dark eyes, she saw not a gangster, but a man drowning in regret. Your mother, he said, his voice thick with emotion, and you've given me a chance to find it again. That is a payment greater than any amount of money. You owe me nothing. Sophia stared at him, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. The stare. The strange sadness. The name Elena. Her mother's stories of a long-lost brother. My mother, she had a brother, Sophia said, more a statement than a question. Julian simply nodded, his throat too tight to speak. The enormity of it washed over her. This powerful, dangerous man, a man who seemed to command the very city, was her uncle. The mythical figure from her mother's fading memories. She looked at him, at his quiet power, the aura of violence that clung to him like a shroud, and the profound sadness in his eyes. The question escaped her lips before she could stop it. Who are you? She asked. Are you a good man? Julian was silent for a long moment. He looked at the sunlight streaming through the window, at the hope that was beginning to dawn on Sophia's face, at the promise of a second chance that filled the room. I am what I have to be, he answered, his voice low and heavy. For most of my life, that has meant being a bad man. He looked directly at her then, and the connection was so strong, so full of 30 years of unspoken history, that it felt like a physical touch. But today, he said softly, I got to be a brother again. And maybe, an uncle. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple, elegant business card. It was blank except for a single phone number embossed in the center. He handed it to her. The doctors will take good care of your mother. They will bring her here when they're done with their tests. This apartment, everything in it, is yours. If you or your mother ever need anything at all, you call this number. Day or night. It will come directly to me. He turned to leave. He had done what he came to do. He had corrected the course of their lives. But seeing Elena, that was a confrontation of a different kind. He needed a moment to prepare his heart for it. "Wait," Sophia called out. He stopped at the door, his back to her. "She talks about you, you know," Sophia said, her voice trembling. Even when she can't remember anything else, she remembers her brother. "She misses you." Julian did not turn around. He simply nodded, a sharp, tight gesture. Then he opened the door and was gone, leaving Sophia in a sun-drenched room full of flowers, holding a future she had never dared to dream of. The reunion was not immediate. Elena's condition was fragile. The doctors at the hospital worked for weeks, adjusting her medication, providing physical therapy, and ensuring her nutrition was stable for the first time in years. Julian received daily updates from the chief of staff. He reviewed every chart, every test result, with a meticulous focus he usually reserved for his financial ledgers. He was orchestrating her recovery with the same precision he used to run his empire. During this time, he saw Sophia regularly. He would visit the apartment, sometimes bringing groceries, other times just to sit in the quiet living room while she talked. She told him about her father, the gentle librarian who had loved Elena so fiercely. She told him about their quiet life, the struggles after he died, her mother's slow decline. She spoke, and he listened, absorbing the details of the 30 years he had missed. He was piecing together the life of the sister he had sent away, filling in the blank pages of her story. He never spoke of his own life. He never explained what he did or who he was. He was simply Uncle Julian, a quiet, powerful presence who had appeared out of nowhere and changed everything. Finally, the day came. The doctor called. "She's asking for you," he said. "By name. Her memory is clearer today. We think it's time." Julian stood outside her hospital room, his heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. Marco stood a respectful distance down the hall. For the first time in decades, Julian Marchetti was afraid. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was bright and sterile. Elena was sitting up in bed, propped against a mountain of pillows. She was still frail, but the life had returned to her face. The dull, vacant look was gone. And her eyes, her green-gold eyes, were sharp and clear. They fixed on him. She stared for a long moment, her expression a mixture of disbelief, confusion, and dawning recognition. "Julian," she whispered, her voice fragile, but it was her voice. He couldn't speak. He could only nod, his throat closing around a knot of 30 years of grief and guilt. "It is you," she said, a slow smile spreading across her face. Tears welled in her eyes. "I knew it. I told Sophia. I told her my brother would come back for me." He walked slowly to her bedside and sat in the chair that was waiting there. He reached out and took her hand. It was thin, the skin like paper, but it was warm. "I'm sorry, Elena," he rasped, the words tearing their way out of him. "I'm so sorry." She squeezed his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "You were protecting me," she said, her memory of that day on the train platform suddenly sharp and clear. "I didn't understand then. But I think I do now." She looked at him, at the lines etched on his face, the profound sadness that never quite left his eyes. "It cost you, didn't it? Protecting me." He just looked at their joined hands, unable to meet her gaze. "I have a daughter, Julian," she said, her voice full of pride. "Sophia. She's a wonderful girl. You would love her." "I know," he said, his voice cracking. "I've met her. She's perfect." They sat in silence for a long time, just holding hands. There were no more apologies needed. No explanations. The 30 years of silence fell away, replaced by a simple, profound connection that had never truly been broken. He was her brother. She was his sister. It was the only thing that mattered. 1 year later. The sound of laughter echoed in the dining room of the apartment. It was a sound that was still new, still precious. Julian sat at the head of the table. To his right was Elena. The year of proper care, of peace and safety, had worked a miracle. She was not the woman she was at 30, but the ghost was gone. She was vibrant, her mind sharp, her laughter easy. Across from her sat Sophia. She was enrolled in night classes at the city college, studying business management. The worry was gone from her face, replaced by a quiet confidence. She looked at her mother, then at her uncle, and she smiled. Marco stood by the door, a silent guardian, but even his stoic face seemed softer in the warm glow of the room. He had seen his boss transform over the past year. The cold, hard edges were still there, the empire still ran, the rules were still enforced, but something new had been added. A warmth. A purpose beyond power. Julian watched as Elena told a story from their childhood, something about a stolen pie and a grumpy neighbor. Sophia laughed, and the sound was music. He felt a sense of peace so profound it was almost dizzying. For 30 years, his life had been about control, about strength, about solitude. He had built a fortress to keep the world out, and in doing so, he had imprisoned himself. Sophia and her mother hadn't just been rescued. They had rescued him. They had torn down the walls and let the light in. Later that night, back in his silent study, Julian sat at his desk. The room was the same, the dark wood, the leather-bound books, the shadows. But on the polished surface of the oak, next to the cold, hard ledger, sat a new addition. It was a small, silver frame. Inside was a photograph, taken a week ago in the park. It showed Julian, Elena, and Sophia, all standing together under a tree. Elena was leaning against him, her head on his shoulder. Sophia stood on his other side, her arm linked through his. And Julian? Julian was smiling. It was not a large smile, but it was real. It reached his eyes. He picked up the frame, his thumb tracing the image of his family. His sister. His niece. The two halves of his rediscovered heart. Power, he thought, was a hollow thing. It was a tool, nothing more. For decades, he had used it to build walls, to keep score, to enforce a brutal order. But in one moment, seeing a young girl with his sister's eyes, he had finally learned its true purpose. It wasn't for building empires of shadow. It was for building a sanctuary against the dark. It wasn't for winning wars. It was for protecting the people you love. A man's worth is not measured by the fear he commands or the wealth he accumulates. It is measured by the light he brings into the lives of others. Julian Marchetti had spent a lifetime living in the darkness, believing it was his fate. But a single, unexpected connection, a whisper of a forgotten promise, had shown him the way out. He had been a brother, a son, a boss, a killer. Now, finally, he was simply a man who had been given a second chance to be family. And in that simple, profound truth, he had found his redemption.